West Hill United is a progressive spiritual community where how you live is more important than what you believe. West Hill United is a people, a place, an idea. We are a community living out of a progressive faith, striving to make a positive difference in our own lives, the lives of others, and the world. Join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. or connect with us at any time.
2, and at the end of readings, we customarily add the phrase offered as wisdom for the journey, and we invite you to respond with the phrase, may we walk in its light. But this is simply an invitation to participate in that way if you want to do so, either muted or unmuted. So, the first reading is by Virgil Kalyana Mitata Yordaki, who is a Buddhist and author of the book Maybe Just Stars, Being and Dust. Fascinating title. Here are some of the words. The love that I believe in is something that goes beyond the physical aspects of this world. The love that I believe is one that extends its energy and power through the beautiful sounds that I encounter along the way. A love that can be seen in the eyes of a little dog, or in the confusion of a cute lost cat who wants to be worshipped like a goddess. This kind of love goes through a divine crafting of a person's inner self, through personal experience and thousands of years of tears and strength that can only be seen in the familiar eyes of old souls. The eyes that recognize each other even after long times of separation. The eyes that find themselves familiar with places they have probably been to before, but that nevertheless bring great memories with every visit. This kind of love sees hope in the eyes of the newborn children that know way much more than they're capable of putting into words, and that bring with their innocence a smile on each person's face who'd wish they could start again. The love that I see when I look at you is a love which has roots deep inside each of us, but that needs care and light to grow and unfold its branches so that they can reach outside of themselves and even further beyond the skies. Offered as wisdom for the journey.
May we walk in its light.
In its light. The second reading is by Maya Angelou, who was an American poet, memoirist, actress, and an important figure in the American civil rights movement. In 2001, she was named one of the 30 most powerful women in America by Ladies' Home Journal. Maya Angelou is known for her series of 6 autobiographies, starting with I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings in 1969, which was nominated for a National Book Award and called her magnum opus. Her volume of poetry, her volume of poetry called Just Give Me a Cool Drink of Water 'Fore I Die in 1971 was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. So, some words from Maya Angelou. Words are things. You must be careful. Careful about calling people out of their names, using racial pejoratives and sexual pejoratives and all that ignorance. Don't do that. Someday we'll be able to measure the power of words. I think they are things. They get on the walls. They get on your wallpaper. They get in your rugs, in your upholstery and your clothes. And finally, into you. Offered as wisdom for the journey. May we walk.
All right, good morning. How's everybody doing? All right, awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Greta. Thank you for everyone being here, and thank you for welcoming me back and inviting me to be here to share with you another time. Sitting here and listening and watching everything that was going on, it reminded me that this is where I'm supposed to be this morning, because so many of the things that I have heard relate to some of the things that I wanted to say. So it just makes it all the more meaningful and all the more purposeful. I think one of the big themes around what I want to share with you is around belonging. And for us as human beings, as social creatures and social animals, outside of our need for food, clothing, and shelter, our next greatest need is to feel as though we belong. Is to feel as though we have purpose, is to feel as though our life has some form of meaning beyond ourselves. And the world that we live in oftentimes makes it hard to find that sense of belonging because of things that have nothing to do with us. Maybe the color of our skin, maybe where we were born, maybe our religion. And these things stand in the way of us feeling as though we can belong. Because a big part of belonging is being able to 100% be yourself. Be authentically you in every environment you find yourself in. So, as Greta had mentioned, I actually just came back from bringing a group of people to South Africa. So we're not going. We just came back on Saturday. And it was great to be able to facilitate this opportunity for people to be able to go to South Africa, but specifically just to go to the continent of Africa. There are 17 of us that went together. 16 were black and looked like me. 1 was white. And for the 16 who looked like me, for the majority of them, it was their first time going to the continent of Africa. And this is very significant because when we know the history, this is a place where for many of us our ancestors came from, but we have no connection to. It's a broken link. So for me to be able to facilitate this experience was a very humbling and rich experience for me. And at the end, on the final night, we had a going away send-off dinner, and people got to speak about their experience of being there for 2 weeks. And it was amazing to see how people broke down and how people were just overwhelmed by the experience of feeling connected to something that was bigger than themselves. Something that through our world, through our history, they were separated from before they even arrived on the planet. And it isn't lost on me how significant that is. So I made the commitment to the people who I worked on this trip with to continue to do trips like this, to facilitate that experience for people so that they can actually feel a greater sense of connection, to the world. This is very important because again, as I mentioned, the world that we live in finds various ways to not allow us to fully be present as ourselves. When we speak of the story of South Africa, when we talk about, hate, tolerance, and all of these things that happen in the world, when we look at the system of apartheid and legalized hatred that existed, that only ended in 1990. This is not stuff that is long ago. This is stuff that is relatively recent in the grand scheme of human history. Here's something that a lot of people, don't know, is that for probably most people in this room, we are familiar with the name Nelson Mandela. We are familiar with his work, with his plight, with, him being imprisoned and all of these kinds of things. One of the things that people don't know is that when the missionaries came to his tribe and where he lived and decided that they needed to educate the Africans in their ways, the missionaries at the time could not pronounce his name. Now, every single one of us in this room has a name that was deliberately chosen for us by our parents. We have no say in what the name was, but it was significant enough that they decided to give us this name for it to mean whatever they wanted it to mean to them. And the missionaries, for whatever reason, could not pronounce his actual given name. And they decided, your name is too hard. We're going to call you Nelson. Nelson is not a name that was given to him by his parents. He went through his entire life, and now even in his death, we all know him as Nelson Mandela, but somebody else called him Nelson. That was not a name that was given to him by his family. So that means that every single day throughout his life, he walked through life not being 100% himself, because he was living upon him by other people, simply because they couldn't be bothered to learn how to pronounce it, simply because it wasn't English enough, it wasn't easy enough for them to pronounce. There's a civil rights leader or former civil rights leader in the United States by the name of Malcolm X. Some might be familiar with the name, some might be familiar with his work. Originally, his name is Malcolm Little. He eventually changed his name, or last name, from Little to X, because in math, X represents the unknown. And for people in the world who look like me, who don't grow up on the African continent, our last names to this day are a reflection of the people who once owned our families. So when I am introduced as Dwayne Morgan, there's an understanding that in Jamaica, the Morgan plantations that used to be there, my ancestors once lived and worked and were abused on those plantations. And every single day I walk through life with that memory every time someone says my name. Sometimes people will say, that stuff was long ago, get over it, forget it. How can you forget something that's part of your name? It's part of your identity. It's part of who you are. So one of my best friends when I was in high school, his family is from Wales, and we shared a last name. And it's like, how does this happen? Well, we can go through the rabbit hole of slavery and all of these kinds of things to figure that out, but that is part of the reality. So for Malcolm X, getting rid of the last name Little and replacing it with X was his way of reclaiming something that was lost, something that was a part of him that he had no connection to. My parents are immigrants from Jamaica. They came to this country when they were about 21 years old. None of that is particularly interesting. What is interesting, however, is that when they came to this country at 21 years of age, they had absolutely no idea that they were black. This might come as a shock to many people. But here is the reality. My parents grew up in an environment where everybody looked like them. Maybe different shades of skin, so race didn't exist. Racism wasn't a concept. You were your name, and you were Jamaican. The end. And then they came to this country, And when they got to the airport, their passport was stamped, their passport was returned to them, and with the returning of their passport, they were given a new identity. Now you're black. They had never been black before. They had no idea what it meant to be black because they had never been black before. This was an identity that they had now been given that they knew nothing about. So they had to figure out a new country, new systems, new weather, and now a new identity of being black. And these young people were clueless as to what this meant. But as they tried to figure out this new world and new environment that they were in, they saw how people treated them because they were black. The things that people said to them because they were black, opportunities that were given or denied to them because they were black. It was here, in this environment, where we speak about diversity and equity and inclusion, that they learned what racism was. For so many of the people who are coming here as immigrants, refugees, etc., they will experience racism for the first time here. They are coming from environments where they know nothing about those things, but they find it here. So when someone was saying before about how, the land acknowledgements are nice, but we have to do, go beyond that, we really have to think about this world that we live in, because even today there are people coming here and experiencing racism, being othered here for the first time. It was 4 a.m. when she woke me, and I can still remember the cold sweat on the back of my neck like it was yesterday. 15 years have now passed, and I can still remember the pregnancy test in my hand and how it felt like my heart and my world had stopped simultaneously, and nobody knows this. But at every doctor's visit, as he would perform routine ultrasounds, I would look from the ground to the screen, hoping, praying to God that none of the squiggly lines that I was seeing would confirm this little being as a boy. And I don't feel good about it. But I've lived a long time in skin despised simply for its hue, so every November I go populous. Not out of disrespect, I'm just not a fan of Remembrance Day, remembering that there has never been a plane sent to save us. We are the displaced, our bodies and religion stolen. We were given a new prophet as they used us to make profits. Ask Nike what a black man is worth. For hundreds of years, we've been killed as a form of amusement, gunned down with no fear of repercussions, so don't blame me for not wanting to be burdened by the birth of a black boy born into a world built on his back, forcing me to teach him how to write and his rights, knowing that even my greatest efforts can't keep him alive when his skin is a threat. So yes, I stood there, staring blankly at a screen, hoping, praying to God that none of the squiggly lines that I was seeing would confirm this little being as a boy, maybe. Having a girl would increase my chances of not having a child who'd grow up to be a hashtag trending, because the killing of black men has been a trend since forever. So we write Black Lives Matter, not to try to inform others, but to try to convince ourselves in a world that is constantly showing us otherwise, and my heart can't help but break for those parents who have had their children snatched from their lives. It was an April afternoon when I found myself pacing around the delivery room, wondering if my prayers would be answered at 3:20. The most precious little girl was presented to me, and I cried uncontrollably for hours, knowing that I had just been blessed. Not because having a girl would make her worth more, but because we live in a world where black boys will always be worth less. So imagine, in what is supposed to be the happiest time of life, when a woman is pregnant, in my community, there's fear, there's anxiety. What if it's a boy? What is going to happen to him? What is his life expectancy going to be like? What is his experience going to be like? Now, my parents had 2 children, my sister and I. They simply wanted to have children. They found themselves the parents of black children. They had to figure out what that meant too. They had to figure out, how do I raise these children to know and understand that their lives have purpose, meaning, and value, when since we got to this country, we have been taught that we don't have that? How do we get these children to understand that their lives matter, that they belong, when since coming to this country, people have made us feel like outsiders, like we don't belong? And this becomes part of the narrative in terms of how we try to raise our children. Because we don't just raise our children to try to be good human beings. We raise our children to survive a world that's going to tell them that they aren't good enough, that they don't matter, that they don't belong. My sister and I, up until grade 4, went to a school in Markham where we were 2 of the 3 black students in the school. And I will not recount to you the names that we were called and how we were teased and little songs that kids came up with to make fun of us. At the time, because my parents didn't go through the school system here, they would just send us to schools with thermoses of foods that we loved to eat at home. Jerk chicken, rice and peas, all this kind of stuff. Hard to believe, back in those days, nobody knew what that was. So people would gather around and say, oh, what are the black kids eating? And it became this big spectacle at lunchtime. Another reason for them to make fun of us and treat us as though we were other. And I got to a point where I said to my parents, just give me sandwiches. I just want to be like the white kids. I don't want any of this extra attention. Just give me sandwiches. Problem is, I hated sandwiches. To this day, I still hate sandwiches. And in my grade 4 brain, I would bring the sandwiches home and hide them in my closet. And in time, our home started to become somewhat fragrant, shall we say. And my parents investigated to figure out what is this smell in the house. And they ended up finding a stash of molding sandwiches in the back of my closet. And in that moment, it was discovered that I was going to school and I would rather starve than be myself. I would rather go without eating than have other people treat me as though I didn't belong, as though I didn't matter, as though I wasn't valuable. So sometimes we have to ask ourselves, when we see people who might be different for any kind of reason, are there aspects of themselves that they are hiding, suppressing, killing just to survive an environment that they find themselves in? Because the greatest tragedy is to find yourself in any environment where you cannot be 100% yourself. So there was a study done in the 70s looking at how early we develop attitudes around race. And they used children and dolls in this study. So I took a bit of that study for this poem that I'm going to share with you, and then I added in some stuff with my experiences with my daughter. And then afterwards, I'll tell you why I wanted to share this today. Michelle, age 4, white. Michelle, which doll is the pretty one? The white one. Raquel, age 4, white. Raquel, which doll is the mean one? The black one. Natasha, age 4, black. Natasha, which doll is the nice one? The white one. Keisha, age 4, black. Keisha, which doll is the ugly one? The black one. Keisha, which doll looks like you? The black one. By the age of 4, the seed of racism, self-hatred, and inferiority is already subconsciously planted in the brain, like sugarcane, like cotton, like cash crops that will benefit those who grow it more than those who sow it, and don't I know it. As the father of a daughter who struggles to see herself on store shelves, these are little black girl blues. You can find darker hued versions of white dolls that look nothing like you. Straight hair, straight nose, forcing parents to have to straighten things out, removing the kinks of self-doubt, becoming vigilant, parenting becoming militant, but only if they get it. Only if they understand the damage being done and the need to protect her identity by any means necessary. Birthday invitations included the postscript, "Please no white dolls," which created their fair share of conversations. Protection seen as reverse hatred. The few dolls of a lighter hue that managed to sneak past our border wall soon found themselves missing like Native women in Canada. It is funny, this little thing called race, how it plays out from day to day and has us worshiping things that look nothing like us, whether dolls on store shelves or their version of Jesus, and these little things are always so much bigger, which is why she forgets cartoons but remembers every detail from Hidden Figures and some. will still see this as nothing, but I saw her desire to become a doctor after watching Doc McStuffins because representation matters. It matters to see yourself reflected in the society in which you live, not as a cliche or stereotype, but just as normal and positive. And maybe this is too much to ask when the fabric of our economic quilt happens to be anti-Black. Periodically, I will ask, if you could, is there anything about yourself that you would change? At 15 years of age, her answer has remained the same. No, I'm pretty awesome. Yes, you are, I always reply. Fist of pride held high, beaming on the inside, emanating out, proud that there's one less Black girl who refuses to play and be shaped by society's dollhouse. So all the speaking that we do about diversity, inclusion, equity, all of these kinds of things, go to Walmart, Toys R Us, any of these places and stand in the doll aisle. You would be amazed that in 2023, it is extremely difficult to find a doll that looks like my daughter. Same features, same texture of hair. Try to find a doll wearing a hijab, an indigenous doll, a South Asian doll. Now, what happens is that when a young person stands in that aisle and they look at all of the dolls and they don't see a doll that looks like them, in that very moment, they are being taught you don't belong. You don't matter. Nobody wants you. And they look at all the dolls that are there and they say, oh, that's who matters. That's who's important. That's who I have to look like and be like in order to be chosen. And in that moment, a little seed of negativity is planted for many of us when we were too young to even realize that that seed was being planted. And every time we go through life and we feel slighted, we feel microaggressions, we deal with racism, it nurtures that seed that tells us that we don't belong, that we're not good enough. So we still have work to do. And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this group of people to South Africa is because I believe that travel is one of the greatest educational experiences that exists. However, not everyone is going to have the opportunity and the ability to travel, but what we have to remember is that there are worlds that live and exist inside of every one of us. And the greatest way to tap into those worlds is through conversation, giving people passports into your experiences, into the things that you have done and the things that you have seen. It is through those conversations that we get to travel into places we have never been before and have the potential to forever be changed. So thank you all very much.
Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps.